Meanwhile, the president up and tweeting this morning. You've heard a little bit about it, slamming the New York Times for their report on White House counsel Don McGahn.
The president saying, quote, some members of the media are very angry at the fake news story in the fake story in the New York Times. They actually called to complain and apologize, a big step forward. From the day I announced the Times has been fake news, and with their disgusting new board member, it only gets worse.
Here with his insight, author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump and Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz. Mr. Dershowitz, thanks so much for being here. If this were your client, would you condone your client waiving the attorney-client privilege, or in this case, the executive privilege, to allow you to testify if you had something to hide?
It's a very, very tough call for any lawyer. Look, there is no lawyer-client privilege between the President of the United States and the White House counsel. The White House counsel is not the personal lawyer for the President. He or she is the lawyer for the White House, the government of the United States. So there was probably no lawyer-client privilege to waive. As far as executive privilege is concerned, it's a tough call. And unless you know everything that the lawyers know, it's awfully hard to second-guess it, because the president's position is he did nothing wrong. And if he did nothing wrong, he has nothing to fear from his White House counsel having a full sit-down with the special counsel. Also, it doesn't risk anything for the president, because the president can't be charged with anything based on what the counsel said. He can't be charged with lying to a federal official or perjury, anything of that kind. So it's a tough call. At the time they made it, the president's position and his lawyer's position was full cooperation with special counsel in an effort to try to end the investigation as soon as possible. That didn't work. The investigation continues. It looks like it's never ending. It continues. There's still negotiation about whether the president should testify. I think the bottom line is it's less bad for the president to have his counsel testify, or White House counsel testify, than to have him speak to special counsel. Because if he speaks to special counsel and says anything that's contradicted by another witness, he's essentially walked into a perjury trap, even if he did nothing wrong.
Professor, so the president gives his gives the White House counsel permission to go speak, says be transparent, tell him everything, and yet the investigation doesn't end. Was that naive of the president to think it would? And does that say more about the investigators, that they're maybe not after the truth, maybe they're after a scalp? Because apparently what we did learn from the New York Times article is that Don McGahn said that the president didn't do anything wrong after 30 hours of testimony.
Yeah, what they're interested in the special counsel's office is writing a scathing report to Congress. The thing that's wrong with the special counsel is if you have a regular U.S. attorney investigating a case and nothing comes of it, that's no big deal. They go on to the next case. But if a special counsel spends tens of millions of dollars, hires an enormous number of staff members, and comes up empty or with small numbers of indictments against low-hanging fruit, people who had very little or nothing to do with the subject of the investigation, well, then he's a failure, and nobody wants to be a failure. And that's why special counsel who come in with essentially with targets on the back of certain people persist until they think they can come up with something. And so I think maybe it was a bit naive to think that Mueller would end the investigation when they had access to special counsel. This investigation looks like it's going to go beyond the 2018 midterm elections, because we're getting awfully close to a point where they can't release a report without influencing the election, and that would be in violation of Department of Justice rules.
And Professor, you talk about this dragging on, and the McGahn story yesterday and this morning in the New York Times reminded me how many times before we've seen the media melt down with, aha, maybe Mueller has finally got him. They did this months ago when George Papadopoulos pled guilty to lying to the FBI, and you heard a lot of people say he's going to turn on the president. Listen to this and we'll get you to react.
Right.
Guilty plea from a former Trump campaign advisor named George Papadopoulos. An even bigger bombshell, this time pointing directly to the question of collusion.
How is it not collusion when George Papadopoulos is in contact with various people who are promising dirt on Hillary Clinton?
Papadopoulos information has the one key word that should frighten everybody in the White House, and that key word is guilty.
Bombshell. Jim Acosta said it might show that there was collusion. Guess what happened, Professor, on Friday? We learned George Papadopoulos is only going to get 1 to 6 months in prison. Still very serious. He lied to the FBI. We can't minimize that. But most importantly, he has nothing to testify against the president. Nothing. And they called it a bombshell.
Well, the reason that so many commentators have been so wrong in all their predictions about everything they've said is because they are substituting hope for reality. They have an agenda. They want to get the president. And so they read every single news report as supporting their agenda. The reason I've been correct in virtually all of my predictions is I have no interest in this other than civil liberties and explaining the law. I'm trying to predict and explain what I think the law will say and do. And I've been generally correct about that because I haven't mixed my hope or aspirations into my professional judgment about what I think the law is and what the law will come out. I'm distinguishing between what I want the law to be and what the law currently is.
Professor,
and under the law currently is, this was not a big deal, yes, and people have understood that.
Professor, you stuck to the law, not an agenda. That's very important. That's why we try to have you on every weekend. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, Professor.